Good afternoon and welcome to a webinar brought to you by Good Governance Africa, addressing the disappearing youth vote, especially in these next months with the government elections. My name is Ron Derby. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Local Guardian. And joining me to have this discussion is four researchers from UGA, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Lilith and Maduleke. Can you just put of yourself, where you're from, how long you've been at UGA, and just why, what brings you to this?
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you to our audience for joining us. By introduction, I am Leleti Maduleke. I am a junior researcher under the Human Security and Climate Change Program at Good Governance Africa. I joined the organization in April, and that was because of my love to kind of hold our leaders accountable for the actions, that they take. So I'm here today to speak about why our youth are very lenient or unwilling to vote, and why we need to understand the reasons that they bring forward to us. Thank you.
All right. Next in Monique Bennett. Monique, I know Monique very well for so many years. Monique, give us a sense of why, how long you've been at GGA and just a real contribution to this conversation.
Hi, Ron, and afternoon to all our listeners and audience that's joined us today. I'm Monique Bennett. I joined GGA last year in March, just before the pandemic, about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. I'm a senior researcher for the Governance Insights and Analytics program. So my work focuses a lot around data. And today I will be presenting some of that data, particularly looking at what young people think of service delivery in South Africa and their sentiment around elections and political parties. And I look forward to the discussion and hopefully it will be fruitful and we can engage on various topics around youth and elections.
Thanks. Stuart Mbanyele is also on this call, who was very nervous before we started speaking. I hope he's sitting down now. It's just a conversation. Stuart, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Hi to everybody that's tuned in. My name is Stuart Mbanyele. I'm a researcher in the Governance Delivery and Impact program here at Good Governance Africa. So I've been here for the past 6 months, I think. And we've been doing a lot of work and research and analysis around elections, both regionally and within South Africa. I think it's an urgent task to unpack the state of affairs, particularly the crisis that we're in, and also what we as young people think and what we bring to the table in as far as the conversation right now and beyond the 1st of November. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Stuart. And lastly, Pranish, Desai. Can you give us your bit of your history?
Okay. Good afternoon, Ron, and hello to the audience listening in. My name is Pranish Desai. I'm a data analyst within the Governance Insights and Analytics program at GGA. Today, I'll primarily be putting into context the patterns and trends with South Africa's younger voters in the global context of the trends of younger voters in democracies across the world. Thanks.
Thanks for that. We look forward to this engagement webinar. I just want to remind people to participate by posting any of their comments or questions with us in this conversation. I'm going to start and have like an open forum. Before we started speaking, we spoke about the fact that I'm very old, right? Clearly out of the youth segment. You guys, 94 was, some of you weren't around for 94. I just want to get a sense of, broadly speaking, what does elections really mean for you as it relates to this African story? Stuart, I'll start with you, put you on the spot. You must know some more. So give us your take on just what generally elections mean for you in this country, and how many have you so far participated?
Thank you, and I think this is going to be my second local government election. I voted firstly at a local level in 2016, and now, before that, I voted in the 2014 national election and 2019. I think for me, because obviously I was born after 94, so I don't have that struggle history, but then growing up in modern day South Africa, you become aware of your reality and the reality of your peers. And you realize that one of the ways that you can exercise urgency is by holding elected representatives to account for their conduct in as far as the mandate that they've been given to sort of provide services and provide leadership and provide accountability. But for me, it's most interesting at a local level because unlike national elections where you vote for a president or a minister who's going to be in parliament in the legislative and administrative seat of the country, you're voting for somebody who lives down the street, who lives in the same suburb as you. So now your realities are pressing there. You've got whether you have access to a safe road, whether you have water in your tap, and whether the refuse gets collected every Monday or Thursday. So that's what makes local elections more pressing for me and more decisive, because ultimately local government is the closest to the people. So it has a bearing on our day-to-day lives. So that's why I think I'll put X on a ballot on the 1st of November, so that I hold those that represent me at a most closest level to account. Yeah, that's it for me now.
All right. Monique, as much as Stuart speaks about his own view of elections and the importance of them, quite clearly the data shows that for a vast number of youth, the youth 15-34 category aren't as engaged. Just why do you think the South African youth seemingly aren't as engaged as Stuart pointed out there?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for that, and I hope some of my colleagues will jump in to assist me here. But I think some of the reasons pertain to just a distrust, an overall distrust of institutions, and we've seen that increase over time since the 1990s in terms of elections, and Afrobarometer's data clearly shows that. I think I have a figure here that have 40% do not trust the local government or elected officials in the local government. So clearly there is that mistrust, and I think, yeah, my colleagues can continue, jumping in here.
Leleti, like in regards to this distrust deficit, as it were, what are the factors behind it? And is it just public, or also applies to the private sector as well? Trust deficit the youth are feeling.
Thank you, Ron. I definitely agree with Monique. There is a trust deficit, and this stems mainly from corruption that is happening within the municipalities and also on a national level. We have seen this with the recent report by the General Audit to say that out of more than 200 municipalities, only 27 of this provided a clean audit, and there were some that were not even providing financial statements, and this speaks to the lack of accountability and lack of transparency, and that also influences the unwillingness to vote by the youth. What the political leaders need to understand is that the youth understand and they have a deep understanding of corruption, and they are watching. But a lot of talk is around, the youth is not interested in politics. The youth, does not care about what happens in the country. But that is not true. The youth actually sees what is happening, and we have been very active, with social media. You have seen this through trends and hashtags calling for the removal, or resignation of corrupt leaders. So this distrust stems from corruption that we've seen both in the local level and the national level.
So it almost seems like the activism of the youth is played out on social media platforms, right? That's the more or less the go-to. Instead of going to the polls, quite clearly given by the data we've seen here. But Pranish, you said you almost give us a global perspective, but I think we always, South Africans, we love naval cases and look at our own problems and say, and almost regarding ourselves as rather unique. But just give us in a global context, are South African youth on their own, or is it a much broader problem?
It's a broader issue globally across developed countries and developing countries, across mature democracies and young democracies like our own. What you consistently find across countries is that younger people do vote, but they always tend to vote at lower rates than their older counterparts. In a recent study done by the OECD, they found that in only 2 countries out of more than 30 did younger people between the ages of 18 and 24 vote at a higher rate than people between the ages of 25 and 50. And those 2 countries were Belgium and South Korea. So what it shows is that examples of higher voting by older people when compared to younger people is pretty much the norm across the world. There are many reasons for this, and finding solutions for it is difficult. What is more concerning within the South African context is that the direction of the trend that young voting is going in is very worrying, particularly for the longer-term health of South African democracy. For example, for this year's election, more than less than 40% of all eligible South Africans between the ages of 18 to 29 are actually registered to vote. What this means is that even though we have very low registration rates amongst 18 and 19-year-olds, once they enter into their 20s, they're not actually registering to vote. And as a result, there's a pretty large risk that they start falling out of our electoral democracy altogether. For this year alone, about 7 million young South Africans in that age group will not be, have not registered, and so will definitely not be voting. And that's to say nothing of what actual turnout patterns on the day is. So South Africa is not unique in terms of having low participation by young people, but the worrying signs are that the participation by young people is moving in the wrong direction and not in the right direction.
That is some worrying commentaries, given how South Africa is an outlier there. What is it about our political spaces? Is a space for actual participation from the youth? I'm just thinking out loud now of the various leading political parties. I mean, their youth wings. I think the last youth wing that really mattered on a national scale was the ANC Youth League. That was more than 10 years ago, not even longer. Is there space generally for the youth to play a role in our political space, or are you guys stuck on the periphery in social media, which can be a bit like political changes? I'll ask Stuart, is that it? Where is the space for you? The space for someone like yourself?
I think I'll speak to the past 5 years and how the political space has sort of changed, not just the last 5 years, but in the last 10 years. I mean, as you rightly said, that the last Active Youth League was sort of the vibrant one, was, no matter how controversial it was, the ANC Youth League post that infamous disbandment. But recently, in the political landscape at a national level, I mean, you only, well, until recently, you only had one minister in cabinet who was within the youth band, and that's the Minister of Justice. And within political parties, you see this whole chasm between the elders and young people. For instance, we've seen the recent events within the Democratic Alliance as well. But also how the EFF came into the political space, yet still that didn't translate into an actual mass mobilization of young people, particularly when it comes to the polls. So we have a number of inter-party dynamics where the focus is on national issues or contestations over positions, but then at the governance level, political parties have really not done that well in as far as co-opting young people, but also convincing them to vote. I mean, you've got serious serial crises of accountability, scandals of corruption, and a myriad of issues, malfeasance at a local level that sort of, instead of bringing young people into the fold, you find them alienating. But also beyond just political positions and party leadership, the municipalities and governing departments at a technical level, professional level, haven't done much to sort of co-opt or bring technically skilled young people into the fold. I mean, you've got high incidences of nepotism in municipalities, particularly around the metros where the stories have been aired out, but also with young people essentially need jobs, they need entrepreneurial assistance, but then the space has become so politicized that they've become largely desensitized to engaging in politics, and that translating through a vote at a ballot. So it's those dynamics that I think that are glaring.
Leleti or Monique, for stepping here, just your take on just the space that's afforded to you as you.
I think for me, the space is there, but there is a lack of responsiveness when it comes from political parties. The youth is very much engaged in, social issues, and we are standing up. And we have seen this with also the rise of independent candidates with these local elections. But there is the government and political parties are not listening. Rather, they are talking at us. They're not talking to us. They're not talking with us. And because of that, it creates a barrier between the youth and platforms that we need to engage in. And I've made this example before. We are very much active in social media. We are very much active when it comes to airing out issues that we feel, affect us on a daily basis. But because there's no one who's really listening to us, that space is closed off when it comes to this. And this also goes back to the lack of voter education and civic education. This year, we didn't see much of that going on. And we have to understand, yes, a pandemic happened, so that obviously had an impact on that. But at the same time, South Africa is one of the highest internet access users in the world. And in Africa, we have information and communication technology where we can get through. And I feel like, platforms and, the IEC as well had an opportunity to actually communicate with the youth, to communicate with young people through these platforms. So definitely we have a space, but there is a barrier to that space.
Monique?
Yeah, I agree completely with Leleti there. And I also think there's a huge hesitancy to join a political party as a young person just across the country. And even while I was at university, I felt, talking to my friends about, politics and voting, there was a hesitancy to join and affiliate yourself with one political party. And I think it's particularly challenging now for some young people to decide who to vote for, because the legacy, being born after 1994, there's a different life experience of us compared to our parents. So I think it's challenging to think, who am I going to vote for? And perhaps that's one of the reasons why so many young people aren't registering, because they don't know who or what they are voting for effectively. And even for me, this election, I've actually been more motivated to read up on smaller parties and educate myself on alternatives, because I'm dissatisfied with current opposition. I'm dissatisfied with the ruling party. So I feel more motivated to find out, but it's not information that's readily there for me to investigate. I have to, take time out and research and read manifestos. And I think some of the opposition party communication is very negative, particularly the main opposition party in the DA. I've felt quite disillusioned because most of the communication is negative, and it's not what we will do or what we want to do. It's more the ruling party is bad, or, don't vote for this party, vote for us. And that's not good enough for me. That's not a good enough reason. So, yeah, that's my thoughts there.
We can take us perfectly into a question that we have from Professor Jim Powell. Thanks for the question. He's asking the panelists here, how do the panelists consider the introduction of direct democracy for the voters? Is control the politician? Is this a solution perhaps to make it more, bring it closer to home? I can start with you, Pranish. Is this a solution to bring it closer to home?
I think there's certainly arguments in favor of direct democracy in terms of engaging citizens more directly in regards to actual governance issues instead of just calling on their votes every 5 years, whether it's for local elections or for national elections. The thing is, it probably wouldn't address the problems South Africa specifically has in regards to a badly resourced voter education platforms, um, actually meeting voters where they already are, actually investing in our democratic and electoral institutions, um, introducing direct democracy itself will not solve these sorts of problems. Uh, Moving it specifically to the issue of young people participating, um, one of the things which I do think that all political parties and our electoral organizations, such as the IEC, need to actually focus on is consistently engaging in with young people and making them feel a genuine part of our electoral democracy. So what tends to happen is that political parties will forget about young people except when it's election season, and then they'll ask for their vote. That's not a sustainable way to make them feel like genuine participants. Trust is built over time, particularly with groups which are more skeptical of these sorts of institutions. So, what South Africa really needs to focus on is not whether direct democracy will work better or some other system will work better, but rather how do we, whether it's political parties or organizations or young people themselves, actually ensure that lines of communication are consistently open. To be in a democracy means that it's active on behalf of both the people who are voted in power and also the people who are voting them in power. So, in general, South Africans do need to try to put more greater effort into getting involved.
I mean, I'm like amongst you guys, I like an old dog, but these early 40s anyway. But I want to ask about something that was really encouraging for me when it came to the youth. I think I was just at the cusp of getting out of the youth circle anyway. And that was like 5, 6 years ago, and that was the Fees Must Fall process, right? So at that point, that energy, that was the youth standing up and having a real, so it was a real political point around about the funding of education and it's a point. Oh no, what happened to that energy? Lilith, you spoke about the whole shift to social media. Do you think in some way that there was a distraction that always want that energy? But there was a real positive energy. The fact that the youth were speaking up and talking about their particular issue politically, a very sensitive issue with regards to the funding of education. But I just think in the past 5, 6 years, I don't know what you guys believe, but it just seems to have fallen away that level of energy and activity. Lilith, I'll let you go there.
Okay. So I think that started with the whole, political parties starting to absorb these leaders into, their governing parties. And this had an influence on, our ability to continue actually protesting against issues that matter. There's a number of leaders that are now part of the EFF. There are a number of leaders that are part of the ANC, and now the main cause which we're fighting for, which was free education, is now divided by political ideologies and manifestos of those certain political parties. So I think we still have the youth that is very much active, that is very much interested in, fighting for what we believe we deserve. But because of these certain influences from the certain political parties, it is now actually creating a sort of division between the youth. So we need to now sit back and think, what is more important, is actually us fighting for this service delivery that we're fighting for, is that more important, or gaining influence and being part of this big political party, is that more important? Because we have seen with our youth leaders now, being part of a political party is much more important.
The leaders of that movement in particular kind of like sold out. Would you say that Monique almost got into the system? Is that something of a sentiment within the youth with regards to that leadership base, which was kind of exciting? Monique?
Oh, sorry, I missed you there. Um, sorry, Ron, the audio wasn't great. Can you
No,
repeat yourself?
I mean, that's energy that came with the Peaceful Fall process, right? The energy was speaking to Leleti's comments there that almost was they were usurped into the big parties as well. Do you think that's the reason why that whole energy has evaporated, such that youth element of politics?
I think I understand Leleti's reasoning, and I mean I also think the fact that our unemployment rate for young people is so high currently, sitting at 64% in the second quarter of 2021, I think there's a concern in that, or I don't know. I think unemployment is a big factor in youth maybe losing energy to fight for political change, because the most important thing is to get food on the table and to find opportunities to better yourself and to provide for your families and to have some sort of future. And possibly many youth are disillusioned by that kind of ideological struggle, and perhaps they think that there's better ways to spend their time, for example, looking for a job. So that's my thoughts on that. I don't know if Stuart,
Yeah.
you jump in here. I think you had something interesting to say.
No, I think for me, Fees Must Fall was quite as Ron rightly put it, a landscape-defining moment for South Africa's youth. However, before Fees Must Fall, and currently you have about 5 or 6 protests taking place every day in South Africa, and majority of those are youth constituted. And sort of the Fees Must Fall generation represented a particular subsection of society, but then the cause was important. But now what is encouraging for me rather is to see all of those people taking up space, whether it's at a political party level, where they're becoming MPs, becoming increasingly now, I've seen a trend where many of those people, that generation of Fees Must Fall, are now vying for councillorship in municipalities. And besides whether if that's a good thing or a bad thing, I can only hope that it translates into a generation of leaders that prioritizes accountability, prioritizes the key concerns, local economic development, clean audit outcomes in municipalities. But at the end of the day, we can't all be political leaders. So I'm interested to see how that also translates into ethical public servants at a technical and administrative level, at any sphere of governance, particularly at a local level. I mean, besides the need for councillors and politicians, you need water scientists, you need engineers who can build quality roads and stuff. So that for me is the core issue in as far as that generation of the 2015, 2016 Fees Must Fall movement, beyond being co-opted and eating in the system. Yeah.
In our Pranish, when it comes to youth unemployment, it's a huge issue here, and in most of large parts of the developing world. Is that a theme you're seeing? The youth unemployment, poverty, and the rising inequality are factors that are leading to this almost this disillusionment, as it were, with the political process.
Yeah, these are definitely factors which are involved in, especially in developing countries. One of the things that I've noticed in looking at public opinion surveys across many countries is that even if, to go back onto the point of participation in political processes beyond elections, so like attending community meetings or participating in a protest, even among young people who say that they do not attend these sorts of meetings, there's a subset of those who said that they would attend were they not actually involved with doing other things, whether that's job seeking or furthering education or doing these sorts of things. So it does once again highlight the need for political parties and institutions, obviously across the developing world, but specifically in the South African context, given our own worrying trends in both youth unemployment and youth participation in electoral politics, that these are areas which the government needs to seriously invest in. and make sure that it's known to young people that they are a priority in terms of determining the direction of the country, and also in terms of charting the future of the country.
Pranish, there's something rather interesting when it comes to youth participation, maybe a case study that you can share with us in regards to Zambia, right? Where 60% of the adult population can be considered in the youth category. In their local elections, they had quite a significant impact on the change we saw there.
Yeah, the Zambian example is very useful in terms of pointing out that young people, especially in this continent, which we all know is the youngest in the world, and has the youngest populations in the world, can play a decisive role in shaping electoral outcomes in one direction or another. In that election, Zambia saw its highest voter turnout in 15 years, and much of that vote decisively backed the eventual winner of the election. What it shows is that young people, when they do choose to vote at high rates, and when they are integrated into political processes and feel the need to make their voice heard, can have an impact, particularly in a continent where so much of the adult population actually falls in that age group which you mentioned earlier of between 18 and 34.
I was thinking out loud as you guys speak. I'm remembering those July protests earlier this year. And lots of the people that we all saw on our TV screen, lots of young people, of course, there were lots of young people and women were part of the whole protest. You know that they're not playing a role in like informal politics, like our youth. Is this like ultimately the risk of when people aren't engaged in a formal political process, that these bouts of political instability is something that we're likely to see if the youth aren't disillusioned with the political process? I'll start with Lilith. Is this a way where perhaps the youth will be heard more frequently?
Sorry about that. Can you please repeat?
Yeah, with regards to, I was thinking what you were saying about the youth disillusion of the political process, and I was thinking back to the July protest, right, where we saw lots of young people and and also women in particular being part of those protests that we saw. Do you know, because of them not being involved in the political process, is this how I guess they'll make an impact in South Africa's zeitgeist by having more of these protests being a feature of South Africa's daily lives?
No, I don't think this is the future of South Africa. I think what we witnessed during the June-July protest, it was a mixture of, several issues, that stemmed from discontent with the leadership, frustrations from the pandemic, because I know a lot of people have lost their jobs. So what better ways to, act, or rather what better ways to address, this vacuum of leadership other than protesting? Of course, protest is not, the answer to anything, but this was actually stemming from frustration, if not anything else. The frustration that people felt, the youth felt that they were not being heard, the youth felt that they did not have a voice. And, with our current president, he had promised, that the youth is going to get jobs. He came up with this program called the YES program, where the youth will be given opportunities to learn about, working in a corporate world. But what we found out is that, there's very little percentage of observation, of being absorbed into organizations after these, internships and after these programs. So that frustration, accommodated, a lot of violence within the streets of South Africa. So I do not think this is the future of South Africa, but I do believe that if our political leaders are able to address the frustrations that we have, which is mainly unemployment, like Monique stated, 64%, that is very alarming for a youth unemployment. So if the political leaders actually listen to what we want as the youth, and actually create opportunities that will not only leave us hanging after a year or 2 years, but actually we get absorbed into these organizations, then we will see less of these protests. So I don't think this is the future for it.
Monique, coming to you, you were lucky enough, as you say, just to join GGA, for example, just before the pandemic hit. Let's speak a bit about this COVID-19 frustration that we've seen over the past 18 months. I mean, we saw lots of literally, especially I guess from an educational standpoint, lots of disruption there. From a jobs perspective, lots of companies, literally there was a freeze on hiring in fear of this pandemic, and as it unfolded. It's a little bit about just how much more frustrating has it been, especially youth who are basically at the coalface of COVID-19? How frustrating has it been, and how is it? That is also a factor we can consider when we think of next week's times, the polls there and the participation of the youth.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think even prior to COVID-19, I think the job search market or the job search for young people is incredibly difficult. I think there isn't enough education and training on how to present your CV, how to find jobs on job boards, how to relate your skills to what job offers there might be. And I think, now adding the pandemic onto that, where you are now, if you are studying, you are now at home, you've got no engagement with your lecturers, with your peers, you've got you essentially, your network isn't the same as if you were physically engaging with people and making friends and making, mentors in that same way as you would if you were physically at the university or at the Technicon or at school as well. So I think young people feel incredibly alone and isolated due to the pandemic. And I think a job market, which is already scarce, has now become even more scarce. And young people still are not sure how to enter the job market. And knowing people seems to be the most effective way. But if you are unable to, engage in a network in person due to COVID, then how do you get to know people and showcase what your skills are, what you're about, what you're passionate about, what you've studied? You can't do that. So I think it was an issue before COVID, and I think COVID has exacerbated that issue. And I think government and the education department need to be more focused on training young people on how to get jobs, how to apply for jobs, how to build a network, how to find a mentor. And I felt like that wasn't done enough at my university, and I don't know if that's the same sentiment for others, but yeah.
Stuart, I saw you raising your hand. What's your take on these COVID frustrations and its impact on all of
us? COVID times. I think obviously the pandemic was unprecedented, but the impact, besides the personal and observational frustrations in terms of the economic impact of job losses and the loss of income and other things like that, I think it exposed so many fault lines in as far as the country and in as far as governance is concerned. I mean, you saw people, politicians using money that was meant for COVID relief to line up their pockets. I mean, in one instance, you had a place where money that was supposed to sort of fix water infrastructure last year at the start of the pandemic was used to buy the mayor a new vehicle. So COVID exposed fault lines in as far as governance is concerned, but also the impact at a municipal level. Now people lost jobs, they lost income, so now they can't effectively sort of pay municipal bills or function in that space. But essentially, I think it has an impact in as far as to an extent voter turnout. I mean, people are reluctant to sort of go to the polls because they fear for their safety. And now you have a conversation where people are saying that much consideration wasn't placed on the economic well-being when we were placed on level 5 or level 4, but now it's because it's election season and there's a need to legitimize the process. You've got alert levels going down now. So this sense of mistrust and poor, I think, to a great extent, communication on the part of political leaders to citizens, I think for me that's the standout issue. But I think COVID presented an opportunity to expose these fault lines, and I think people must take that to heart when they go vote in the next 2 weeks. So yeah, that's my take on the COVID question.
Pranish, I'm looking at a graphic that you put together here using stats from Stats SA and ISA, looking at participation rates. In 2016, this is between the age 20, people between the age of 20 and 29, there was quite a marked increase, right, in the participation rates for those local polls. And I always, in those polls, in the newsroom here, we're discussing what is the story of these particular polls. In 2016, quite clearly, there was a juicy story to it, right? It was almost a referendum on the governor, the tenure of our former president, Jacob Zuma, as president. So that was a nice story to it. You almost saw that excitement with regards to going to those 2016 polls and hence the bloody nose that the governing party had. I think this year, COVID-19, all the and just just the tiredness of the youth, is that just fundamentally just the problem here of people just giving up that any change is afoot?
I think there's definitely an element of COVID fatigue in that will be influencing the upcoming local elections. Most people and analysts seem to believe that it will be quite a low turnout election. But even linking to the point Stuart made previously about the relevance of being informed as members of the electorate and as young people specifically, it's important to also contextualize the role of local government and local government elections. This is the level of government which is closest to you on the ground. It's the level of government where you can have the most level of control and influence, both in terms of your own participation and engagement beyond voting, but also in your vote itself. It just matters more because the actual voting area is smaller. And this is also the level of government which is responsible for things like providing basic services like your electricity and your water, and ensuring that your sewerage systems are working well within that local area. But especially relevant in the South African context, local municipalities also have a responsibility to offer free basic services to needy households. This is a very important thing which makes a direct impact in people's lives and can help the country deal with its many problems with regards to equality. It's another reason as to why people should be inclined to vote and why this election does matter. It's also a way of holding officials to account if they've been found to have had corrupt dealings or in regards to things like financial malfeasance, which are listed in reports like those released by the Auditor General. The sort of the fundamental point that I'm trying to make is that local government elections should matter regardless of whether it's COVID time or not. This is the branch of and the level of government in which you can have the most influence. And so this is a hard-fought right to vote, which people of this generation do have, and for which a lot was sacrificed in our country's history. And in the practical sense of people's everyday lives, local government elections can play a big role in terms of ensuring that we meet our responsibilities and we get our rights as citizens met.
Speaking to that, I'll carry on with the for a second. The trust deficit issue, right? We spoke about that earlier on in this conversation. Given that the youth are clearly, just looking at the data, I'm saying before me from the GGA, there is a huge problem with when you guys don't trust your politicians, certainly don't trust me in the media, right? And it's like, even in social media, parts, I don't know how much you can trust Zuckerberg or anyone from Facebook. So I want to ask this: where is the youth placing their trust now? What are the institutions where the youth are laying their trust in, and just what does that speak of? I'll pick on you, Pranish, because there is the graphic I'm seeing here is a graphic you also put together, and then after that we'll move into Stuart and then Monique. Pranish?
So what the data shows is that essentially young people are especially skeptical of local institutions. In the two most recent Afrobarometer public surveys of citizens' interest, local government councils were either the second lowest or the lowest trusted institution in South Africa. In general, South Africans tend to trust institutions like the courts of law more than they do the local councils, and it's generally the mechanisms and institutions which are involved with accountability, which tend to be more trusted in South Africa. These are perceived by South Africans, and especially young South Africans, to be ones which do tend to be working better than the political institutions in this country.
Stuart, what does it say when the youth are looking out for courts, the army as well, and this security? What does it say about the country, this country, and its youth?
I think it paints a dismal state of affairs, an indictment in as far as, I'll start firstly with political leaders and political institutions. I mean, every day media headlines are littered with stories of corruption. We've seen that at a national level with the stuff that's coming out of the Zondo Commission. At a local level, you see it when the municipality fails to pay Eskom, but you see the municipal manager driving down in a sort of top of the range Mercedes Benz. So that sort of feeds into the climate of mistrust on the part of the population. And sadly, the ruling party at a national level and in many municipalities hasn't done much to foster that climate of trust. Also with opposition parties, you've seen the scandals in the DRN city of Tshwane and Johannesburg at the time, and also with the VBS scandal with the third leading party at a national and local level, which is the EFF now. So that sort of gives the question of who do you trust, who do you turn to, who do you think can be more accountable? But then I think this also provides an opportunity. I mean, the levels of trust in courts of law and institutions such as the army and probably in the crime and justice cluster, I think it shows how there's still a level of trust that can be salvaged there. So if you capacitate these institutions, such as courts of law and the police and investigating institutions, as well as Chapter 9 institutions, then you still have a level of credibility that you can salvage. But more importantly, if you capacitate such institutions, then it can help alleviate the problems of corruption and all of these things that exist within state institutions, these challenges. And that can go a long way towards fostering a climate of trust, but also accountability and also service delivery as the end goal. It can remind people that they are sort of tasked with the position and responsibility of leadership, and they have to be servants of the immediate community, the province, and the country at large. So I think that's my take on the question of the trust deficit, which, if resolved, I mean, many people can ultimately have faith in governance and take to the polls and participate in state institutions and processes. So, yeah.
Kind of makes me think to that question. I guess we must get to some sort of solution to this, right? And it's the question of, so how do we get the youth engaged with the political system? Is it a case of job opportunities, actually a strong dealing with poverty rates and the inequality questions, which basically, in a nutshell, is providing an environment where people can be hopeful? Monique, is that where people can start? That's when maybe the youth get more engaged with the process, if there is that element of hope that returns to South Africa story. I think over the past decade, if not more, that is clearly something sitting here. I'm listening to you guys who've been liking.
I think job creation is definitely an aspect of it, but I do believe in terms of the electoral process, we need to have the youth sitting at the table, and there needs to be civic engagement between local organizations, communities, local municipalities. In the case of Zambia, this is to get youth to come out and register and vote. There was a lot more civil participation, and they had NGOs on the ground going into communities and educating young people on the electoral process and having discussions and allowing young people a seat at the table. And just by having this webinar, I feel we all feel like we've now got a voice and we can share, and I think that's not been happening enough. I think young people are not sitting at the table enough in political processes and civic engagement. So more things like this would help, but obviously we need to get the Electoral Commission to be better funded, as my colleagues alluded to, and have them engage with civil organizations on the ground in local communities to educate people on how they can register and go out to vote and what it means to vote and why it's so crucial, as Pranish alluded to earlier as well.
Leleti, your take?
Yes, I definitely agree with Monique. Civic education is very important. I think as the youth, one thing we do not realize is that the reasons that we have stated for not voting are the same reasons that should allow us, and influence us to vote. Because with civic education, it creates a better understanding of the rights and responsibilities that we have as the youth. It also provides us with sufficient knowledge to know electoral processes and political systems that are within the country. And, it will help us understand the value of democracy, because when we hear from our grandparents and our, parents, they always talk about this value of democracy and how long it took for them to fight for it. So I think civic education is key to us understanding this value of democracy and what it took, for us to get to this democracy. And most importantly, voting is, it is a tool that will help us to promote and address socio-economic challenges that we're currently facing. This is our voice. This is our platform to voice out our issues, our challenges that we're having, and we only have one chance to do this every 5 years. So if we're not going to vote, that means our opinion and our voices are taken away from us, and we have to wait for the next 4 to 5 years to wait again and to actually express ourselves. So I do believe, that the youth needs to come out and vote. I know there's about 11 million of us that actually did not register to vote, which is, alarming. But to those that have registered to vote, it is crucial for us to go out and vote and put our choices in that ballot paper.
Yeah, that's, to your point, Stuart, it is a problem for the youth to become just basically passengers to the squabbles of old men in South African politics. What will you give it as a way forward to get the youth back and engage the process? So, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I think beyond voting or not voting, there's actually so many institutions and so many mechanisms that people can use, from participating in IDP, in integrated development planning processes at a local level, to forming ward committees and all of those things. But then that can only take place after voting has been achieved. I think political parties have an urgent task of building trust within themselves and when in governance. So if you do the job right, deliver services, have free and transparent electoral processes, have sort of the codes. I mean, for one, the ANC has made a commitment to say that 1 in 4 of the candidates that they're putting forward for every ward or seat that's available has to be within the youth band. So whether that will actually be enforced is questionable, but then that's a positive step in the right direction. And if parties could emulate that, because I mean, essentially, the youth will bear the brunt of whatever decision making that gets taken today. So if good decisions are taken and that translates to good and efficient governance, then you'll have a happy youth and a voting youth and a thriving economy, a thriving and developing economy. So those are considerations that must be taken within the party hierarchies, and also the youth must also be innovative at a local scale and sort of take up space, as some people say in South Africa. So that can only firstly be done through the ballot now. But beyond that, it's a conversation that must be had further and prioritized, I think.
Apologies, Ron, you're on mute.
Apologies there. Pranish, I'll let you close out. Just how do we ensure that, I guess, as a final question, that the youth aren't just passengers to the optimistic process?
Okay, so
Sorry, I can't hear you, Pranish.
I have 3 points which I'd just like to sort of raise in this regard. The first relates to one of the points which was made earlier, which is about increasing and properly investing in civic education, specifically targeting young voters. This country has a history of having targeted, well-funded, well-resourced campaigns to improve civic education. It was essential in ensuring that the 2 national elections which we had in the 1990s were among the highest turnout elections across the world. That's the sort of place where South Africa needs to go back to. And to move back into that right direction, the government and these national institutions need to ensure that their voter drives and voter education plans and processes work to the scale to meet the challenges of the sort we saw 30 years ago. And this needs to be a continuous engaging process. And also in terms of consistently engaging young people, which is another point I made earlier, it's very important to make sure that they feel consistently engaged within our democracy. It doesn't do to contact them 2 weeks before an election and say, give us your vote and we might do something for you in the future. They need to be made to feel a consistent and valued part of this democracy, because they are also the ones who can ultimately determine the course of this country and to ensure that South Africa lives up to the goals and aspirations which were articulated 25 years ago when this country was founded as a full democracy. And then lastly, it's just a thing of to be reasonable in our expectations of young people and their actual participation in electoral democracy. It's a worldwide problem that they tend to vote at lower rates than their older counterparts. There are many explanations for this, and solutions can be hard to come by. What's very important for us in the South African context to make sure is that the participation levels are moving in the right direction and not in the wrong direction. If we can get these things right, then our future as an electoral democracy will be much, much more secure. And from that, we can hopefully realize a lot of the developmental goals which this country has.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I have to say, Leleti, Pranish, Monique and Stuart, this was very insightful for me, an old dog in this game. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, GGA, for sponsoring this webinar. And of course, I've got to thank myself, Lady Guardian, as well. But thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks to the audience.